Hello everyone and welcome to week 4 of lectures for Exercise Science 330 Advanced Motor Learning Control. And for this week's lectures, what we're going to do, we're just going to break them up into 3 different parts. So probably about 10 minutes for the first bit, and then 15 minutes and probably 15 minutes again. So how we'll break them up in the first part will be on. So we want to know now, how do we actually know that mental practice actually works, and what research has been done to validate this process? So if we go to the slide which says mental and physical practice, and the first point on it is Hurd et al., we know from a study from Hurd and colleagues that they studied 6 combinations of physical and mental practice because they wanted to see, does it work, and is there a specific combination that works better than others? But the real key findings from this, and one we can use from today for our first sort of aspects of looking at this, is that mental practice alone was better than no practice at all. So first of all, what this tells us is that even if you don't do any physical practice, if you're able to do mental practice, that you will see some level of improvement in your physical performance. They also said that a proportion of physical practice increased for both tasks, and the combination of physical and mental practice results were similar to only physical practice. So once you sort of started to get the idea of the movement, it was very hard for them to distinguish the difference between physical and mental practice. But what was really good about it too is when you think about it, if mental practice can assist you, then you don't have to do as many physical trials, and therefore injury or fatigue, etc. can actually be a benefit as well. But what we do now in the learning, we do know for sure that mental practice can definitely improve skill performance at all different levels. Now the next slide looks at different kind of skills that we really know that it works best for closed skills, but we know it works really well for things like power sports and so forth as well. So there's been a lot of research done on that process. Now, the next slide I want to go to is just looking at how you actually physically do it. How do you actually physically do mental practice? So Singer and colleagues found out a pretty good way of just trying to outline a basic way if you were trying to start it or working with someone to try to start the process. And they looked at a 5 sort of method way of how you sort of go through the processes of mental practice. So first of all, it says step number 1, get ready physically, emotionally and mentally. So what that means is actually mentally trying to imagine that you're physically doing the skill. So again, if we go back to a thing like a tennis serve, what you're going through is if you're physically there serving, what are you feeling? What are you going through? What was your previous attempt mainly? What are the things you've been working on? In the crowd? Is it hot? Is it whatever? What is it the conditions actually are? So you're actually going through that process there, and that's really point number 1 and 2. They're actually mentally imagining yourself doing the performance. Then you want to say, what are the key cues that I'm focusing on? So if I'm a beginner, there'll be a few cues. If I'm a well-established learner or an expert and I'm in a game situation, there's going to be a few go-to cues that I'm going to use, which is going to let me go into autopilot. So I'm going to work with my coach to pick up some really good cues that just gets me into autopilot, which gets me to just forget the other stuff and try to just be in the moment. So there'll be cues that you'll know, and then so you'll imagine yourself going through those cues. Then you'll actually imagine yourself executing the movement, and then after that, you'll actually mentally imagine yourself evaluate the performance. And that's really the process of going through mental imagery for a particular sport. The next slide we look at is it's really used appropriately for immediately prior and during a competitive event as well. Now, the next slide we look at too, guys, look at the different theories in motor learning control. And what we find is I will not ask you questions on these kind of theories. There will be questions in exams on lecture 1, which was on dynamical systems and motor programs theory. There'll be questions on that. But when we go through different motor learning concepts, there'll always be an underlying competing number of theories, which one side says, oh, this is the reason for it. Another side says, oh, this is the reason for it. And they're still not resolved. So I'm not going to ask you to go through those. But generally, you can see in this slide, there's a neuromuscular and there's a cognitive explanation. So normally there's a cognitive, like a hierarchical explanation, and normally there's a combination dynamical sort of process combination. But I'm not going to ask you that information, but that slide is there to show you the compelling theories of why things work in motor learning, and they're still, like I said, they're still not resolved. But the next slide, we look at mental practice and imagery ability. And the thing I like about this is, like anything in motor learning, there's an ability level. Some people are better at it than others, and that's a reality. Some people are really good at trying to picture themselves in a moment, doing the skill, evaluating what it feels like, what it looks like, seeing the ball, doing this. They're really good at doing it. Others aren't necessarily as good. And generally speaking, those are more left brain, analytical, probably struggle a little bit with the mental practice because there's a bit more right brain creativity involved in it. So that's something to recognise as well with the people that you're working with. And one thing you can do it is an MIQ, so a movement imagery questionnaire, and actually get people to go through physically doing the skill, and then you actually get them to mentally do the skill, and there's ways you can go through that too. And sometimes we'll do that in the labs if we've got time for, but just to keep this in mind, there are definitely some people, and there's been research on this, I think I'll put in the slide there, Gross and colleagues, that have actually shown that some people are better at that than others. So really, what this summary is looking at those processes of mental practice, of mental imagery. That's really what the combination is. They're the things that are going to be on the exam question. There's a next part of the lecture that looks at pre-shot routine. That's not going to be in the exam, so I'm not going to go through that right now with you because I think there's a lot of information already. That's a really good sort of 10 or 15 minute conversation we can have at another time for the lecture slide. So just focus on up to the summary slide on mental practice, and that will be it for this first part of the lecture 4. Okay, thanks guys, bye-bye. Mental practice. The second part will be on what's called contextual interference. And the third part will be on what we call massed versus distributed practice. So a bit of terminology there, but that just explains how we'll just break them up. So for the first sort of 10 minutes, we'll speak to you about what's called mental practice. Now, the first slide in the lecture has all a list of objectives for this week. So for this first little bit, we're just going to focus on the one, 2 and 3 that are related to mental practice. So if we look at the third slide here, we look at the introduction to mental practice and what it's really used for. And like with most things with motor learning control, as you've seen the first sort of 2 or 3 weeks, that most things are related to whether you're a coach, a teacher, or a therapist, and how you can apply all the different sort of theories of motor control in these different sort of settings that we look at. So in a performance situation, like in high performance sport, you can look at here, the example says a gymnast mentally rehearsing their routine. And that's a really good way of looking at mental practice. So mental practice does work probably best for closed skills where you've got a bit of time to rehearse before you do it. It's a bit harder for open skills because you can't really determine when they start or stop. So it can definitely help a little bit in your preparation, but it's mainly looking at trying to improve mental practice, specifically for closed skills. They probably work better than others. So for our first example there is for a gymnast rehearsing their skill. The second one, it says here a paraplegic mentally rehearsing walking down a flight of stairs. So again, a closed skill in a rehab setting. An example there is, trying to figure out how you're going to approach the step you're going to be doing and actually going through your head in an overt way before you actually produce the actual movement. And the last one is similar to the first one. A closed skill is a goal for mentally rehearsing the upcoming shot. And there's a lot of research and information, both anecdotally and with coaches and so forth, of how this works really well, and how they try to use their right brain rather than their left brain to make them less mechanical. But I'll give you some examples of that as we go through. So if we go to the next slide, what actually is mental practice by definition, if you like? It's not daydreaming, or I've got the slide there, mediation, that should say meditation. So it's not meditation or daydreaming, it's actually, the definition here is the cognitive rehearsal of a physical skill in the absence of an overt physical movement. So it's actually physically imagining yourself doing the particular skill. So you're physically going through, you're mentally going through those processes as if you were there at the time doing the skill that you're meant to be doing. And really what it comes down to is you're trying to almost get in touch with those task intrinsic information that you would normally engage in when you're doing a skill. And what the process of mental practice or mental rehearsal really is is to get you just to go into autopilot. So you physically, when you get the chance to do the skill, you just go into autopilot. So it's really to stop people being too mechanical and actually thinking about their skill whilst they're physically doing it, because that's when most close skills break down. We have a lot of time. So when we have a lot of time, we have a lot of thinking time to figure out what can go wrong. Again, that fear-based mechanism. And so if we spend too much time trying to figure out how to fix it mechanically, normally the skill becomes very mechanical, it breaks down. So if you're an expert in a skill, you want to just be able to allow yourself to do it. So the freedom of being able to do it. So mental rehearsal is almost training your brain to be less mechanical and just allow your body to do it naturally. So you're sort of in the zone is what you call it. So that's sort of the process of what mental practice or mental rehearsal really is. And we go to the next slide, and there's two different ways we can do it. We can do it what's called internal imagery or external. So we can almost imagine ourselves physically being the person we are running it. So we can pretend that if we were Cathy Freeman in the 400 metre final Olympic Games. So there's two ways that we can mentally rehearse as if we were Cathy Freeman. We can mentally rehearse as if we were her. So we're pretending that I'm here, I'm doing the race. I'm almost going through what my heart rate's going to feel like at the start, what my feelings are, what the process is, what I'm trying to focus on, what my first 100 metres is going to be like, the feeling in my body at 200 or 300 metres, heart rate up, lactic acid in the system, telling myself to relax. So I'm almost experiencing those senses as if I was physically in it as I was going. And that's called an internal way of imaging, if you like. The other way we can do it is an external way. So we can actually pretend we're up in the stands watching yourself do the skill and trying to feel what that's like for the person watching. So here it says external is imaging the skill or part of the skill from the perspective of an observer. Now, why do we do that? Why do we do it from an observer? Because a lot of times too, when you're in the moment and you're in the skill, especially in team sports, it's hard to step back and see the big picture. So if you're able to see the big picture externally, that will help you when you're doing the skill as well. So there might be little cues that you can pick up on from watching the skill externally and then imagining what that feels like, and that might help you when you're doing the skill. A classic example is even this year in that NAB Cup in the AFL game, they got Jared McVeigh, the Sydney Swans captain, to coach for a day. So he actually had to watch as a coach what it was like, and he was amazed. This is a guy that's really experienced, 10, 15 years in the sport, and he says that amazed at the different level of information he received that would help him when he's on the field making decisions now, because he was able to sit back and watch it all omnisciently, if you like, from the stands and really see it differently while still being engaged in the process and the result. So that's sort of how mental practice can sort of help us both what we call internal and external. Now, there's two main roles we look at. I've just mentioned high performance sports. So the second point there in the slide is aiding in a well-performed skill. So when you already know the skill really well. Or secondly, improving the acquisition of the skill. And normally, improving the acquisition of the skill means you're almost using mental practice, and we call that cognitive stage. And the important thing is when you're in the cognitive stage, you're very anxious, you're very heightened, a lot of stuff going on. So mental practice gets you to focus on one of the key aspects of the skill in this first stage of learning that we want you to focus on, we want you to get out of it, and they're the things that you can focus on with your mental practice. You're not trying to do the skill really well, you're not trying to be an expert, you're not trying to not make mistakes, you're just trying to say, right, what do I want to focus on in this first part of the skill? And that could be something as simple as keep your eye on the ball. So you're mentally imagining yourself keeping your eye on the ball. So they really serve two different purposes there, but they're very specific to the level of ability where you're actually at. Right, so mental practice aids skill acquisition. So that's the next slide we're looking at. And here we want to know, like most things in sports science, well, how do we know this works? And has there been any research done, or is this just stuff we're saying that